Well, welcome everyone. I'm PJ Trudeau of the HR Roundtable. Thank you so much for joining us today for the power of listening. What happens when we are intentional? I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Lynda Wilner, who is a speech, language, and soft skills executive coach, inspiring professional speaker, author, and speech and language pathologist in the Baltimore Washington metropolitan area. She's the founder and CEO of Successfully Speaking, a woman-owned communication consulting firm that helps individuals speak, sound, and look like leaders. This includes professional speaking skills, listening skills, voice improvement, accent modification, and regional dialect reduction for native and non-native English speakers. Lynda provides public speaking classes to individuals and organizations and speaks at local and national industries. Lynda hosted a video series, Hard Facts About Soft Skills for HR Professionals, and currently is hosting an interview series, Successful Speakers. In addition to the 10 modification training books and materials that she has written, she just released Miss Persnickity's Guide to Everyday Misspeaks. Kashonna Holland is an engaging keynote speaker, an inspiring coach, a motivational author, and an insightful corporate trainer. Kashonna is the president and CEO of Simply Kashonna, a business built to promote bold, fearless, and courageous living. Kashonna has helped many people walk through the ambiguity of their lives and on to defining their life's purpose by discovering their authentic self. Both in the corporate arena and in the nonprofit world, strategic growth and development of people have always been the focal point of her service. Corporately, she's held positions in both human resources as well as the staffing industry. Additionally, Kashonna spent years in an executive role where crisis intervention and spiritual guidance were her primary responsibilities. Understanding that leadership training and development is essential to any corporation or organization's growth, Kashonna launched SK Leading Forward, which is dedicated to enhancing employee engagement, performance, productivity, and morale. Let me turn it over to you now, ladies.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And the first thing we'd like to ask everybody to do is if they can close their camera for this portion so that you'll see just Kashonna and myself, or Kashonna and me. It's persnickety and say the right word. I'm hard on myself when I make a mistake. It's a pleasure to be here, everybody. We're so excited to be able to share our ideas and what we do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the first thing we want to say is that we know that you are the experts. This is not a training session. We're not really going to be talking about what we do in training. We're not training you because you know about this area, but we'd like to share our approach on how we see communication as an essential part of addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that these initiatives are included in your organization, because without communication, we can't make those changes. Kashonna, why don't you start up with some of the challenges that we have here regarding diversity?
Absolutely, Lynda. Thank you so much for those polls that definitely gave us an eye opener in terms of where our audience is today. And we saw this image and wanted to definitely share it because it is a great depiction of where we are in terms of our culture and where we are in our organizations when it comes to addressing some of the issues that we have around diversity, equity, and inclusion. What I loved about this particular image is, at the bottom of the hill here, we're recognizing racism in America. And then, of course, when we get up the hill, we actually see that that's where we actually start doing something about it. So here we see this great gap. Now, one of the things that I do want to highlight here is that when we're looking at diversity and inclusion, it's not just about race. I am not discounting the fact that we do have things that we are working through in terms of race in our country and in our organizations. But I do want to make sure that when we're saying diversity, when we're using the term diversity, we want to make sure that, and we're going to pull out a wheel a little bit later to kind of give you some idea of some of the areas that we're talking about as well. But I do want to make sure that we're pointing out some of these things that are on that hill, and they are age, physical ability, neurodiversity, religion, and gender. Now, some of you may be experiencing in your organization some fatigue, maybe some frustration, because when things start to happen, we tend to want to be very reactive in terms of our approach. And what we're doing is we're coming to you and saying, now there's a way that we can be proactive about how we're handling these issues. And so we definitely want to move into how we do that, so that as we are going up that hill, we don't get tired, we don't get fatigued, we don't get frustrated, but we continue moving forward with the work that needs to be done. Next slide, please.
And I'll just mention, Kashonna, because we talked about this earlier, that not everybody is as familiar with the neurodiversity. For those, and I think we're talking to HR professionals, but I don't want to assume that everybody knows everything, because this is not as popular, but the neurodiversity is dealing with the people who may have challenges such as if they're on the autism spectrum or Asperger's, any of those features where they may have some intellectual differences. Sometimes we find they bring so much to the workplace. There are skills that sector might have that can add to it. So we wanted to include that there as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lynda, for that. We again want to make sure that we encourage you. And when we move a little bit further, we'll see that will, and we'll see some of those differences on that will as well. So here we are, acknowledging differences and seeking commonalities. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was in middle school, when I walked into the cafeteria, what I did was I always looked for the table of people with common interest. I was a cheerleader. Yes, I was. And, and so I looked for those people who were cheerleaders, or I looked for the athletes in the cafeteria, and I sat at that table. I was seeking the commonalities first. Now, here's what we are going to encourage today. We're going to encourage that you actually also acknowledge differences. Why? Because sometimes, or somewhere along the line, we have been taught to ignore the differences and not really celebrate the differences. But today we want to offer something a little bit different. We want to say, yes, acknowledge the differences. Again, celebrate the differences, and also seek commonalities. And again, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I definitely wanted to make sure that we understand the beauty, again, of acknowledging those differences and making sure that we don't kind of sit back and think that we don't have to see it. One of the things that I hear people say a lot of times is, I don't see color. Well, and I know they don't mean any harm by saying these things. I know they're saying, I want to make sure that I am always embracing everyone. And that's a wonderful thing to do, but it's not necessarily a wonderful thing to say, because we are different, and it's okay to be different. It's okay to celebrate those differences. And again, we're going to today encourage you to make sure that you're also seeking those commonalities.
And I think, Kashonna, when you say that, the thing that we always have to remember is that we have to assume the person had good intentions.
Absolutely.
It wasn't to say something negative, but they may not have realized the impact, and we'll get to the words, but the impact those words might have on somebody.
Absolutely, Lynda. We talked about earlier the diversity. We want to make sure that we are diverse, but we also want to make sure that we are inclusive as well. And we won't get on that today, but this diversity will, and most of you may have seen this before, it has a myriad of things that we can look at to really refer to help us to understand diversity. Again, it's not just about race. It's also about age. It's about gender, zip code, where do you live, marital status, schools. All of these things are very important when we're looking at diversity, when we're looking at our biases. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. We got to make sure that we are aware of these different ways to be diverse. And honestly, these lines get very blurred. They do. They get very blurred because we are thinking, okay, well, I'm falling in more than one of those areas. So what do I do here? How do I navigate that? And we're going to talk about how you navigate that, and not just that, but not just you personally, but also how do you navigate it in your workplace? We all come with our different experiences, our different backgrounds. We all come from different cultures. And again, we want to celebrate those differences. We can come together in a complete circle in spite of our differences. So even as you are looking at the people in the participants chat over here, and you're seeing how people have different names and they have different adjectives describing themselves differently, I want you to think about how we are addressing people outside of our circles. What are some of the things that we're thinking about? What are some of the things that we are bringing in our perspectives when we are addressing those people? And I know that that has a lot to do with what Lynda's getting. Lynda, this is so good. Go ahead, and because I love this slide. I love this slide. Talk about that.
Because I know, Kashonna, you went in the cafeteria to focus on the commonalities, but that's not what your brain really wanted to do. Research shows that our brain is very primitive, and research shows that we look at the differences first. We can't help ourselves, because early on, years and years ago, when you looked at something and they looked dangerous to you, you had to protect yourself. So you had to see, how is that person different from me? Or that bear is different from me. And when that bear shows his teeth, I see a difference and I better run. And so we're wired to protect ourselves. And so we naturally find that difference. So finding differences actually comes first. Then, so you went in there and you probably saw the tables you didn't want to sit at.
That's
Because you
good.
saw the differences. The challenge is now, then you look for how are we similar? You know, how can we be similar?
That is so good.
Again, what do we do with that? And we will talk about this reference, Dr. Helen Turnbull, who I know and is wonderful and wrote this phenomenal book on the illusion of inclusion, because her feeling is it's not possible.
Yes.
We won't get too deeply into
It's definitely challenging. Yes.
We highly recommend that book.
Yes.
So with that in mind, what should we do now, Kashonna?
Well, actually, we're going to break out, Lynda, in our groups, and we are going to find commonalities within our breakout sessions.
One of the groups, Allison's group, said all women, all live in the United States, all college graduates, all like to read. Okay, group 5, HR, own a car, have siblings, all work remotely, all women.
You guys did great for 90 seconds.
Really, they have come up. Group 12, all women, HR workers, wear glasses, all from the DMV area.
Love it.
Dark hair, brown eyes, workout, faith. That's a lot in one group to have similarities. Curious, wanted to attend this, wanted to listen better. Love, it's getting warmer, have kids, like a sport, interested in diversity, equity. We all have sort of short hair, all women.
I love it. I love it.
So we can find, and you'll see this in the chat when you save the chat later. So we want to move forward because there's so much we want to share with you. But there are so many commonalities. And do you know, some people might even go as deep as saying, well, we all have fingernails, we all have hair, but not everybody does have hair. We all have eyes. And so there are so many commonalities that we don't even think about, that we certainly have more commonalities than differences. Wouldn't you say, Kashonna?
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we go into the next slide, Lynda, one of the things we talk about here is not only recognizing and celebrating our differences, but also respecting the differences. And we have a few bullet points here that we want to really pull out here. We want to work to eliminate the word but. I hear what you're saying, but when we're communicating our differences, we want to make sure that we are using words like and, or we pause, which is going to be my next point there. We respect the pause before we re-engage. We have to make sure that we're engaging our thoughts before we're actually engaging in conversation. When we're talking about respecting the pause, what we're doing is we're taking a minute and we're gathering ourselves. We're understanding the value of emotional intelligence, understanding the value of social awareness in order to engage again in a respectful manner with the person that we're speaking with. Keep going, Lynda.
Mm-hmm.
Don't assume, ask. Don't assume, ask. You know, the beauty of diversity is we come again with different experiences. And one of the things that we can come with is our own perception of life and how we experience life. And that plays a huge part in our communication. So we want to make sure that we ask questions before we respond. The next one is allow the receiver to ask questions to ensure that there's clarity. If we're jumping in the conversation and we're not allowing the other person to ask questions, if we're not having that open door, if you will, then we're shutting them down and we're saying that we already know. And it really comes, or we're coming with a closed heart as well as a closed mind. So we want to be very careful about that. Lastly, listen to the entire message before jumping to conclusions. Even if you think that you know what they're going to say. How many times, and I am guilty, I'm like, I've already heard this before, so I already know what you're going to say. But what I'm saying, what I'm strongly recommending that we do is really shift from jumping in, and we respect the pause and we listen to the entire message before we respond. Lynda?
And so that leads us to avoiding those snap judgments and decisions, because remember, we talked about that primitive brain. We make that quick judgment because we think it's for survival or protection.
Yes.
And so we have to be so careful about that. And because my background is that I'm a speech and language pathologist by training, I look at all aspects of communication. We're not going to get into it so deeply today because we want to cover so much. But communication really breaks down into 3 V's. We have the visual, how we look, the vocal, how we sound, and then the verbal, what we say. So we're going to talk about things we say and issues related to that. But first, we need to look at some of these nonverbal ways of communicating. And so I've developed an approach of focusing on the OLE approach to communication, which means observe, listen, and only then can you truly engage. It can't be one-sided. We can't just worry about what am I saying and I just say it if I don't look at the receiver and pick up the cues that I'm getting back, because we can't move forward if we're just doing a communication one way. I know many of you have seen this quote that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. But I'd like to add to that. We have 2 ears and we have 2 eyes. And so we should be listening and observing twice or maybe 4 times as much. I'm not going to go into the math on that, but so much more than we speak, because speaking isn't going to necessarily move things forward. By the end of this hour, you'll know how emphatic we are that listening is how we do move forward. And so let's talk a little bit about micro expressions or facial expressions that we see. And we look at somebody in a matter of fractions of a second, we pick up their facial expression. So they may say something, but they look like they may be saying something else. And to just demonstrate that, get ready to use the chat, because I'm going to ask you to just quickly, 1, 2, 3, or 4, which person looks puzzled? Just type in 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I want to watch some of the responses that come in. 2, 1, 1, 1, 2. Okay, look at this already. 2, 1 and 2. So puzzled, we're not sure. Is it 1 or 2? What about if somebody's angry? What number would you say for that?
3.
3, 3. Okay, 3, 3, 2. So we don't perceive everything the same way, 2 and 3. Let's take another real quick one. What about shocked? What number would shocked be?
4.
Okay, you're seeing 4s, a lot of 4s and some 3s, but shocked. And then finally, what about disagreeing? Disagreeing, 1, 2. So look at this. Look at the variety or the diversity of responses we have here in this room, that we don't all perceive things the same way. So what's that going to do to communication? We can't all agree on even which one is the puzzling one or which one is the angry one. Let's add another layer to this. Now we put masks on, so we can't truly see some of those facial expressions, and we're limited to this area up here. But please don't forget that we can see a smile with our eyes. And so it doesn't mean we stop emoting or showing facial expressions. It still can be read from our eyes. For those of us who are working in healthcare, it's more challenging because you may not even see the eyes. There may be goggles and face shields. And so look how communication is being affected now and how much more difficult it is to communicate. Thought this quote was really interesting about listening, though, because it's not at all hard to understand a person, or at least you may think you understand the person. What's difficult is to listen without bias. Because as Kashonna said, we all carry our biases. That's natural. How do we listen without that? Or how do we move past that? And Kashonna said this already, but most people, myself included, don't always listen with the intent to understand. We listen to the intent with the intent to reply. How many of us are sitting there in our meetings thinking, I just wish he'd stop because I know what I want to say. I'm ready. I have to get into what I want to say. Well, then I'm not truly listening. And that's so common. That's not just one or two people. I think most of us are guilty of that. So we're talking about communication. You can't help but listen, not just to the words, which we'll get to in more detail, but the tone of voice. If I said to you, I don't have a problem with you, how do you take that? What if I said, I don't have a problem with you, I have a problem with Sharon, right? If I say, I don't have a problem, Kashonna has the problem. So just the way we're changing our tone is going to completely change the message. So we can't just listen to words, we have to listen to the tone as well. So then we get to the microaggressions. I spoke about the micro expressions. Now let's talk about the aggressions. And what's interesting, I don't know, I didn't realize this term has been around since the 1970s. It's nothing new, it's just we're talking about it more now. But these are subtle, but they could be stunning put downs. They can be verbal, they can be nonverbal. And here's the problem. They can lead to microbullying if they continue, if they go on and on. And Dr. Turnbull in her book said it beautifully when she said that one time you say something, I'll say, okay, that was an accident. The second time you say it, well, it's a coincidence. But if I say it a third, fourth, or fifth time, now it's a pattern. And we have to start looking at those comments because there may be something further, something more behind them.
Lynda, you had an experience, and we talked about this experience, and I definitely want you to share with the with the audience today. Can you share that
Sure.
microaggressive
Sure.
language?
And I thought I was being so friendly. And while I'm doing that, I know we're asking you to multitask, but if you have experiences, type them in this chat so you can share some of your experiences if there was a microaggressive behavior that you might have had. I used to work in a long-term care facility, and there was a social worker who worked with me, and she was an African-American professional, and we did work together. We were on the same part. She was social work, I was a speech pathologist. There was no difference in hierarchy. We were friendly, and she was this stunning woman who every day had a different hairstyle. And one day I said to her, "That your hair looks great today. Is that your own hair?" I thought that was fine. But Kashonna, what was wrong with what I said? I got such a look from her that I had no right to ask her that question. And the whole interchange switched just because of the one question I asked in a very innocent or naive manner. So
Absolutely. I love that one because, of course, I mean, I changed my hair as well. So when she said that, I was like, oh, this is good. We have to bring this to our audience because things that are they're not intentionally meant to offend someone, but it's said. And if we don't address it, then we keep saying it. And I think that's where sometimes we meet the resistance, or we meet the conflict rather, when we don't address the microaggressive statements. So I'm glad that we had a chance to bring that. And people are putting them in the chat
yes,
box, Lynda, as
right.
well. Here's one from Jane. She said, you're surprisingly current about tech. I'm in my 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. How about this one from Fearless Maxine? You are so articulate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Personal Pelham says, I had braids and a colleague said I look like a Nubian princess. And I love this one because it sounds like a compliment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's a princess, it's a Nubian princess, but we have, and we have to make sure that while we're addressing some of these microaggressive statements, that we are very careful about, saying some of these things, and we ask the questions. We ask the questions. I want you to keep in mind too that sometimes people don't know that they're offending you.
Right. And Kashonna, here Adrian said, why would you do your hair like that? It could damage your career.
Oh my goodness. Yes,
So,
yes,
so
yes.
we're hearing a lot. So I'm 70, I hear all the time. So are you retired?
Mm-hmm. Oh, Alicia said, inventive Alicia said, I have children about your age.
So that's meant to be engaging, but maybe we don't know how the listener is perceiving it. So we can go on and on, but we don't have time to do that. So we're encouraging you again, save the chat. There's a lot of great content in this chat.
Absolutely.
But let me show you what I love about this symbol. This is a Chinese symbol. As some of you might know, that the Chinese characters often have several different parts that create a message. And this is the symbol for active listening. I'd like to say really empathic listening, because there are all types of listening now, but a fully engaged listener is going to use their ears to hear. They're going to use their eyes to see. They will have undivided attention to focus. They put their phone down. They look at the person. And here, what I love these two parts, they use their brain, their mind to think, and most importantly, they use their heart to feel. And if you put all these together, then you are truly embodying being a good listener. But there are barriers sometimes, right, Kashonna? There could be, we all know, background noise. So many of us working from home are finding, oh, there are barriers to my listening. There's noise in the background. There's a dog barking. Maybe somebody who can't listen because they had a rough night and are upset about something that just happened. We know about status, gender, race, and age bias. That's going to prevent us by saying to that person, you're good at tech, even though you're 60. Well, that certainly is an age bias.
Yes.
And then we have the physical appearance that might interfere with our ability to truly listen, whether that's good or not, that happens. And what about the last one, Kashonna?
Tell me, why do you have that in pink?
Oh, I have that in pink. I have that in pink because I had it in red. And
Yes.
you know that 0.5% of women, and I know we're primarily women here, and 8% of men are colorblind. So if you're colorblind, you don't see red or green. And then they wouldn't see that I was emphasizing past experiences, which is such an important part and an important barrier to listening. So
Absolutely.
let's make it pink. I hope everybody can see it. But we want to be truly inclusive of all types of physical, gender, age, race, everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as you know, we have been talking about so many things in this very short period of time. And as you can see, Lynda and I are very passionate about our subject matter. And so we just don't have enough time to squeeze everything in here. So we wanted to definitely make some highlights or bring some highlights to you today. You're probably asking this question, at least I hope you're asking this question. How can you make someone feel safe? Here are some things that I would like for you, or we would like for you to consider. Life experiences. Everyone has not had the same life experiences as you have had. And there's a statement that's going around, and I'm working very diligently to dismantle this statement. That's common sense. When we say that, why? Because our life experiences are so different. And so, Lynda, your life experiences may not necessarily be the same as mine. So what's common sense to you may not necessarily be common sense to me. So we do have to be careful with that. Consider the culture. You know, we all, of course, come from different backgrounds. We have different cultures, and we have to make sure that we're always considering that when we're engaging with other people. Current events is another one. You know, of course, DEI has definitely come to the forefront because of things that have happened in our country. You know, they have definitely been highlighted. And so we want to make sure that we're sensitive to that. That's a part of being socially aware. That's a part of making sure that I respect the pause. I look around the room and make sure that I'm paying attention to who's around before I speak. Ask questions, don't assume. I talked about that a little bit earlier. What else do we have there? Limited exposure. People do have limited exposure. You know, everyone, you know, we could say, oh, well, I studied abroad. Well, everyone hasn't had that experience. So I want to make sure that I'm careful about, again, my interaction when it comes to making someone feel safe. respect the pause, think before you speak. Again, make sure that you are engaging your thoughts before you engage in conversation. Lynda, we have two final ones. Go ahead
Right. Yeah,
and share
listen.
those.
If I didn't communicate that enough already, just listen. We can learn so much from listening. And also recognize that we do have biases. We can't get rid of them. We can identify them, know what they are. As Dr. Helen Turnbull said, even like put them on our shoulder and we can look over and see them, but they're not embodying us. We just have to know we have them and know that maybe, Kashonna, when you said something to me, I listened with some of my biases. And now I need to say, well, that was bias. How else could she have meant that? Or how else
Yes.
could I have said that?
Yes.
And so I love this quote. It's even that much more important because this year, so much has changed between 2020 and 2021, and Larry King passed away this January. But what he said is perfect, that I remind myself every morning, nothing I say this day will teach me anything. So if I'm going to learn, I must do so by listening. And wasn't he a wonderful listener? So with that, now we want to give you breakout groups. This will be less than 90 minutes, but certainly more than 90 seconds. And it's probably going to be about 8 minutes because we want to make sure we have time for everybody to come back. So Marnie, if we set it up as an 8-minute, and when it shows that your session is up, just jump back into the room so we don't have to wait an extra minute. But what we'd like you to talk about in your groups, and we want you to talk about how are you willing to change how you listen, and also talk about how can you feel others feel more valued. Everybody is rolling back in, and some of the groups, if you can, as you come in, to start posting some of your takeaways. I may start talking, Kashonna, I'll read one of them and maybe you could read some as they come in.
Absolutely.
Allison had said that how willing
Hey, Allison.
change. One person works in a male-dominated field, hard to respect the pause because might not get a word in, but we'll try. That's a big challenge. Also, we'll try to set more time aside for open dialogue, remove all distractions to keep yourself in the moment. Thanks for saying that, Allison. To be in the moment is the best way to be a good listener, and put those phones away and all the distractions.
Absolutely. I'm going to read something from group 5, empathetic Frankie Spangler. How are you willing to change how you listen? Letting people complete their sentence before responding. Being 100% focused on the person you are interacting with versus thinking about what is next on the agenda, calendar, email that just came in. Take a break after someone speaks to reflect on what they've said and that they're done speaking. How can you make others feel valued? Work the and instead of the but. Yes. Validating them as individuals and make an effort to not judge, even if you know you don't agree or question in your head. Repeating back what you heard or what you think they said to make sure you are on the same page. That is so good, group 5. Excellent job.
There's so much content here that, again, we want to remind you to save this chat because
save it. Yes.
Another group was saying, listen more, talk less, remove distractions, be fully present. Teresa's posting this. Repeat back to the person to make sure you understand them. That's a phenomenal tip that I'd like to teach people. Clarify what they're saying, because they'll say, no, that's not what I meant, Kashonna. Let me explain it again. If you're interrupted during a meeting, ask for permission to respond to another request. Interruptions is a big challenge for people, especially women and men.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was just going to say really quickly, Lynda, just in terms of the pausing before responding is so powerful. And I personally had to learn this because I was bringing in my stuff, if you will, into the conversation. And when you bring your stuff into the conversation, you never fully hear what's being said. And so be very careful about that. That is so good. I see it in multiple groups, that it was said in multiple groups. That's why I wanted to make sure that I addressed that. Go ahead, Lynda.
As a speech pathologist and therapist by training, the pause, and clinical psychologists use this all the time, or social workers, or people who do counseling and coaches. I mean, all of these areas, that most of us are very uncomfortable with the pause. And if we have that pause there, the other person may want to fill in because they're not comfortable. And so we may get more out of somebody if we just zip up what we are saying and try not to influence. It's amazing the magic that happens when you are quiet. We don't do it. Good interviewers or journalists know how to ask questions and not lead them, but just sit back and let that person share. And that is when the magic happens. So that's a
Absolutely.
really big takeaway. All of you were so wonderful with the content that you gave to everybody by posting in the chat. And Kashonna and I want to be available if there are any questions in the next maybe 3 minutes, but even after today, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love questions. If you want us to talk to people at your organization about this, we just gave you a highlight of our
Absolutely.
approach, but of course we do training as well.